I never thought the worst day of my life would start with my daughter-in-law folding a sweater. She did it carefully, almost tenderly, pressing the sleeves flat before placing it into the small duffel bag on my bed. I stood in the doorway of what used to be my room, the room I'd painted myself 12 years ago, the room where I'd recovered from my knee surgery, the room I'd lived in since my wife passed, and I watched her pack my belongings like she was doing me a favor. "We found a really nice place," my son said from behind me. He was leaning against the hallway wall, arms crossed, not quite looking at me. "It's got a gym, Dad, a pool. You'll make friends." I was 68 years old. I had a bad knee and a decent pension, and a mind that still worked just fine, thank you. I did not need a gym with strangers. I needed my own kitchen, my own chair by the window, and the oak tree in the backyard that my wife had planted the spring before she died. "I haven't agreed to anything," I said. "My son, I'll call him Derek, because that is his name, and he has earned every letter of it," finally looked at me. His wife, Renee, kept folding. "Dad," he said it the way you say a word you're tired of saying. "We've talked about this." We hadn't talked about anything. He had talked. Renee had nodded along with her arms folded. I had sat at the kitchen table drinking coffee I didn't taste and listening to them explain why my living in my own home was becoming complicated for them. Complicated. That was the word Renee used. She said it twice. And both times, she touched the pendant around her neck, like she was steadying herself against the emotional weight of delivering this difficult news. The difficult news being that I was an inconvenience. I had retired 3 years earlier from 26 years as a civil engineer for the county. I had no debt. I owned my car outright. I had never once in the 4 years since Derek and Renee moved in asked them for a single thing, not a ride, not money, not help carrying groceries. I cooked dinner twice a week. I fixed the garbage disposal without being asked. I stayed out of their way when their friends came over, retreating to my room like a guest in a bed and breakfast. And still I had become complicated. "The appointment is Thursday," Renee said without turning around. "We figured we'd all go together, see the facility, and then what?" She hesitated. "And then if you like it, we can start the paperwork." I looked at Derek. He looked at the floor. I didn't say anything else that night. I went to my room and sat on the edge of my bed and looked at the oak tree through the window until the sky went dark. I thought about my wife. Her name was Carol, and she had been the kind of woman who remembered everyone's birthday and cried at commercials and made coffee strong enough to wake the dead, and I wondered what she would have said about all of this. She would have said something sharp and loving and exactly right, and then she would have made me laugh despite myself. But Carol had been gone for 4 years, and I was alone with the oak tree and a duffel bag that was already half packed. Thursday came the way bad days always do, too fast. Too bright, the sky a cheerful blue that had no business being cheerful. Derek drove. Renee sat in the passenger seat. I sat in the back with my jacket folded on my lap and watched Houston pass outside the window. We drove past the street where I used to buy Carol's birthday cake every October. We drove past the park where Derek had learned to ride a bike, where I had run alongside him holding the seat, terrified to let go, until finally I had to. The facility was called Meadowcrest. The lobby smelled like carpet cleaner and something floral that wasn't quite flowers. A woman in a navy blazer with a laminated badge shook my hand and said my name warmly, as though she'd been looking forward to meeting me for years. "We're just looking," I told her. She smiled the way people smile when they don't believe you. We toured the memory care wing first, which was not subtle. I have excellent memory. I told them this. Derek cleared his throat. Renee asked about the meal schedule. I stood in a pastel hallway and looked at a bulletin board covered in construction paper butterflies and felt something cold settle in my chest. By the time we got back to the lobby, Renee had already picked up a brochure and was asking about availability. "I'd like some air," I said. Nobody stopped me. I walked out the front entrance and sat down on a concrete bench near the parking lot. The sun was warm. A bus pulled in across the street. I sat there for a long time. That was when I heard the voice. "You look like a man who just realized something." The voice came from my left. An old man sat on the far end of the bench. I hadn't noticed him when I'd sat down, which told me something about my state of mind. He was perhaps 10 years older than me, late 70s, maybe 80, with white hair combed neat and a pair of dark glasses that I now recognized as the tinted kind worn by people with serious vision problems. His cane rested against his knee. His suit was charcoal gray and well-fitted, the kind of suit that doesn't come off a rack. I realized several things, I said. None of them good. He smiled slowly. That's usually how realizations work. We sat in silence for a moment. Not uncomfortable silence. The kind between people who don't feel the need to fill space. My son is inside right now, I said, asking about room availability. For you? For me. The old man was quiet for a moment. Is that what you want? No. Did you tell him that? I've been telling him for 2 months. He hears what he wants to hear. The old man nodded slowly. He had the deliberate stillness of someone who had long ago stopped rushing through his thoughts. My name is Arthur, he said. Arthur Calhoun. I told him mine. We shook hands the old way, firm, brief, no performance to it. Are you here visiting someone? I asked. My attorney has an office in this building, he said. He gestured vaguely toward the complex connected to the facility. I have a meeting in 40 minutes. I arrived early because I've never been able to stop arriving early. 60 years of it and I still can't help myself. Engineer, I said. Same habit. He turned toward me, though I knew he couldn't see me clearly. What kind? Civil. 30 years with Harris County. Bridges, mostly. Drainage infrastructure. Practical work, he said, with genuine respect. Work that holds. Usually, I said, my personal life is another story. He smiled again. We sat in the sun. A mockingbird landed on a light pole across the lot and ran through about 6 different songs in a row, auditioning for something. I have a problem, Arthur said after a while. He said it almost casually, like he was mentioning a scheduling conflict. My nephew was supposed to meet me here. He's my usual company for these appointments. But he called this morning with a family emergency, and he paused. I find I don't do well navigating unfamiliar buildings on my own. Not anymore. I'm sorry to hear that. I wonder, he said, without any particular urgency, whether you'd be willing to walk in with me, just to the elevators. You could pretend to be my nephew, if anyone asks. Humor an old man. I looked at him. I wasn't sure if it was the absurdity of the request or the simplicity of it, but something about a stranger asking me for help, actually needing me for something cut right through the numbness I'd been carrying all morning. Sure, I said. I can do that. His name, his full name, as I would learn over the next weeks, was Arthur James Calhoun, and he was not a simple man. But that afternoon I didn't know any of that. I only knew that he gripped my arm lightly as we walked through the lobby, moved with careful dignity past the front desk, and told me in the elevator that he used to have a nephew, but that the young man had moved to Seattle and stopped calling. Families disperse, he said simply. It's the nature of things. Mine is dispersing me, I said, before I could stop myself. He laughed. It was a real laugh, not polite, not managed. I hadn't made anyone laugh in a long time. His attorney's name was Patricia Wren, and she had an office on the 4th floor with a view of a parking structure and the posture of a woman who took everything seriously. She barely blinked when Arthur introduced me as his nephew. I shook her hand and sat in the chair beside Arthur and spent the next 45 minutes listening to them discuss things I mostly didn't understand, language about trusts and provisions and directives that washed over me while I watched the parking structure through the window. When it was over, Arthur signed 2 documents. Patricia collected them without ceremony. Arthur thanked her in the tone of a man who has been thanking professionals for decades. In the elevator going down, he said, "You're a patient man. My wife used to say I was too patient," I said. That I let things go too long before I said anything. Was she right? I thought about the 2 months, the conversations that weren't conversations, the duffel bag being packed. Yes, I said. He nodded. Patient men make good engineers. They make poor advocates for themselves. We stepped out into the lobby. Through the glass doors, I could see Derek standing by the car. Renee was on her phone. Neither of them was looking for me. "Can I ask you something?" I said. "Of course. This morning, when you asked me to come in with you, did you actually need the help? Or were you doing me a favor?" Arthur Calhoun was quiet for exactly 3 seconds. Then he smiled, and it was the smile of a man who has been caught at something he doesn't entirely regret. Both, he said. Does it matter? It did matter. And also it didn't. I wasn't sure I could explain the difference. All I knew was that for the last 45 minutes I had felt like a person with a purpose, a man someone had needed. And I hadn't felt that way since I had last fixed something in a house that was no longer really mine. My card, Arthur said, reaching into his jacket with practiced ease. If you find yourself with nowhere to go and time to kill, I eat lunch at 12:30 most days. I'm told the company is optional, but I'm told a lot of things I don't believe. I took the card. It was heavy stock, simple printing. His name, a phone number, an address in the River Oaks neighborhood that even I knew was not an ordinary address. Outside, Derek looked up when I came through the doors. There you are, he said. We thought you left. I was inside, I said. I wasn't hiding. Renee tucked her phone away. So, what do you think? The room on the second floor was really... I'm not moving in, I said. She blinked. Derek's jaw set. Dad, I'm not moving in, I said again. And the second time, it came out quieter and much more certain than the first. I'm going to go home, and I'm going to think about what comes next, and I'll let you know when I've decided something. But it won't be Meadowcrest. I got in the back seat. Derek and Renee exchanged a look I wasn't supposed to see, and definitely did see. Nobody spoke for most of the drive home. That was a Tuesday. By Friday, I had moved into a furnished month-to-month apartment on the west side that cost more than I wanted to pay and smelled like fresh paint and someone else's life. I took my clothes, my tools, Carol's photograph from the mantel, and the cast-iron pan I had used every Sunday morning for 11 years. Derek had offered to help me pack. I thanked him and said I had it handled. I called the number on Arthur Calhoun's card the following Monday at 12:15. He picked up on the second ring, which surprised me. I hoped you'd call, he said. Where are you? I told him. That's 20 minutes from me, he said. Come for lunch. The address in River Oaks turned out to be a house, and calling it a house the way you'd call the Pacific Ocean a puddle. It was a colonial-style property behind a low stone wall, with live oaks older than I was shading a brick driveway. A man named Gerald, who had the bearing of someone who had been quietly competent for a very long time, opened the front door before I had finished parking. Mr. Calhoun is in the sunroom, he said. He said to bring you straight through. The sunroom overlooked a garden that Carol would have loved roses in 4 colors, a stone path, a bird bath that clearly saw regular use. Arthur was in a chair with a glass of iced tea, his dark glasses exchanged for regular ones that he clearly didn't need to see much at all. You found it, he said. Gerald helped from the front door, I said. Gerald helps with most things. He smiled toward the sound of my voice. Sit down, please. Tell me what you decided. I sat. I told him about the apartment, the cast-iron pan, the photograph. He listened the way certain people do, without offering anything until you finished. Good, he said. You made a decision. That's different from letting one be made for you. Lunch came out on 2 trays, Gerald again, silent and efficient, and we ate chicken salad and good bread and talked for 2.5 hours about things neither of us had talked about in a long time. He asked me about bridge design. I asked him what kind of business he'd been in. He said real estate and commercial development, and let me understand gradually, through the texture of the conversation, that the scale he was talking about was not modest. He had been born in Beaumont, he told me. Moved to Houston at 22 with $400 and a specific stubbornness about failure. Built his first apartment complex at 31. Expanded into commercial development through his 40s. Sold and reinvested. Sold and reinvested again. His wife had died 6 years ago, leukemia, 18 months from diagnosis. And since then it had been Gerald and the garden and lunch at 12:30 and the careful management of a life that had once been very full. No children? I asked. No. A pause. It was a sadness we made our peace with. And the nephew? The real one in Seattle? My brother's son. We were close once, then we weren't. Then too much time passed to bridge the distance. He said it without bitterness, just the plain shape of a true thing. I came back the following Wednesday, and the Wednesday after, then Tuesdays as well. We developed the kind of rhythm that forms between two people who have both learned how to spend time well. He would have Gerald set up in the sunroom if the weather was good. We talked about engineering and about the city and about politics without heat. Sometimes I read to him, because his eyes were worse than he admitted, and he'd been in the middle of a book about the Korean War that he hadn't wanted to give up on. I fixed the door hinge on his study without being asked. Arthur said he'd been meaning to call someone about that for 3 months. I told him it was a 5-minute job with the right screwdriver. He said that most problems were, if you had the right tool and were willing to actually look at them. I thought he was still talking about the hinge. About 6 weeks in, I arrived on a Tuesday to find Arthur in his chair with less color than usual, a stillness in him that was different from his normal stillness. "Gerald called Dr. Marsh this morning," he said, before I could ask. "What did Dr. Marsh say?" "What he's been saying for some months." Arthur held his tea glass in both hands. "That I should be thinking about arrangements." I sat down. "How long?" I asked, because he was a direct man, and I had learned that he appreciated directness in return. "The kind of answer that could mean 3 months, or could mean 8, he said. Heart, old, tired. He said the 3 words like they were bullet points. "It is what it is, Arthur. Don't," he said it gently. "I've had time to sit with it. I don't need pity. I need someone to have lunch with and to read to me from that Korea book when my eyes are bad." He paused. "And possibly to argue with me about the 1,970 construction contracts on the Braze Bayou project, which I still believe were mishandled." I laughed despite myself. "They were," I said. "I have opinions about that. I know you do. I'm looking forward to hearing them." We carried on. Tuesdays and Wednesdays, sometimes Thursdays, Gerald would have the tray ready. The mockingbirds in the garden took turns. I finished reading the Korea book out loud, and we argued about a chapter that Arthur thought was unfair to a particular general. And I looked things up on my phone to settle it, and we were both partly wrong. Derek called occasionally. Renee did not call. The calls with Derek were brief and careful, like 2 people passing each other in a narrow hallway. "Are you okay out there?" he asked once. "I'm fine," I said. "Better than fine." A silence. "You seem different." I was different. I couldn't have explained it precisely, but somewhere in the Tuesdays and the chicken salad and the arguing about dead generals, I had stopped feeling like a man who had been discarded and started feeling like a man who had simply gone somewhere else. Something else happened around the 2-month mark. Arthur asked me to sit in on another meeting with Patricia Wren. He said he liked having someone in the room who would remember the conversation accurately. "You don't trust your own memory?" I asked. "I trust it fine," he said. "But 2 minds hold more than one. And Patricia has a tendency to speak very fast when she gets to the uncomfortable parts." The meeting was in Arthur's study this time, Patricia arriving with a leather portfolio and the same focused posture. They discussed several provisions. She laid out a document on the desk. Arthur's hand moved carefully to the paper, and he asked me to read certain paragraphs aloud, which I did. One of the provisions was about me. I stopped reading. "Keep going," Arthur said. "Arthur Thomas. My name, quiet, direct, keep going." I kept going. The language was clear and carefully constructed, the language of a document that has been thought through and written to hold. I read it to the end. Then I set the paper down. "You should have discussed this with me," I said. "I am discussing it with you," he said. "Right now? That's not—" "You came to that bench on one of the worst days of your life," Arthur said. "You helped an old man get into an elevator because he asked. You have come back every week without being asked. You fixed my door hinge. You finished reading me a book about a war. You argued about dead generals with enough passion that I could hear you cared." He paused. "I'm 81 years old. I have more money than I know what to do with, and I have decided what to do with some of it. You don't get a vote." Patricia was looking at a fixed point on the wall, with the professionalism of a woman who has learned to become briefly invisible. I sat back in my chair. "You barely know me," I said, though even as I said it, I wasn't sure it was true. "I know the things that matter," Arthur said. "You are honest. You are capable. You do not take more than you're given, and you are not here because of what I have." He said it the way he said most things, not for effect, just because it was accurate. That last part is rarer than you'd think. I didn't say anything for a while. The garden was visible through the study window. A cardinal was doing something ambitious in the rose bushes. "Okay," I said finally. "Good," Arthur said. "Patricia, let's continue." 8 weeks after that meeting, on a Thursday morning in late November, Gerald called me before 8 a.m. I answered, and he said, simply, "Mr. Calhoun passed early this morning. He was comfortable. He wanted me to call you first." I sat in my apartment kitchen with the cast iron pan on the stove and Carol's photograph on the shelf. And I thought about an old man in a charcoal suit on a concrete bench, asking a stranger to walk him to an elevator, both of them getting more out of the arrangement than they'd let on. I did not go to the building where Patricia Wren's office was for the reading of Arthur's will. I had no reason to be anxious. I had read the document myself. I had heard Arthur's voice saying the things he'd said in that study. I trusted what he had built because I had watched him build carefully. I arrived the following week on a Tuesday, which felt right, and sat in the chair where I usually sat. And Gerald served tea. Derek called that evening. Renee must have told him something, because he sounded different. The careful hallway voice was gone, replaced by something more ragged and unprepared. "Is it true?" he said. "Which part?" A silence that answered the question. "Dad, we didn't know." "No," I agreed. "You didn't. We should talk." "Probably," I said. "But not tonight, Derek. I need a few days." I hung up and went to the window. Houston was doing what Houston does in November, convincing you that winter is never quite coming. Warm air with just enough cool in it to make you hopeful. I thought about what Arthur had said about patient men being poor advocates for themselves, and I thought about all the months I had held my coffee cup in my own kitchen and said nothing while the plan to fold me away was made. I thought about how you could live in a house for years and be a guest in it, and how you could meet a stranger on a bench and become not family. Exactly, but the thing that family is supposed to be, and sometimes isn't. The thing built on attention and time, and choosing to show up. I had a lot of work to do. There were properties to understand and decisions to make, and at some point, a conversation with Derek that would be honest in ways our conversations had not been. I did not know exactly what that would look like. I had never been a man who planned emotional conversations in advance. Carol had always said that was both my best and worst quality, that I dealt with what was in front of me when I got there and not a moment before. What was in front of me now was a window and a city and something that felt, cautiously, like a beginning. The cast iron pan needed seasoning. I had put it off for 3 weeks. I got it down from the shelf and started to work on it, and the familiar weight of it in my hands felt like something settling back into place. Some things hold when they're built right. That had always been the first thing I told young engineers when they came to work for me, before calculations, before specs, before all of it. Some things hold. The trick is knowing which ones and building accordingly. I was 68 years old, and I was learning it again. Somewhere across town, an oak tree in a backyard I used to live in was probably doing fine without me. I hoped it was. Carol had planted it with the particular seriousness she brought to things she intended to last. She had watered it herself for 2 springs before she got too tired to go outside, and she had asked me then to do it for her, and I had, every week, for the 4 years since. I should call Derek, I thought. Not tonight, but soon. Outside, the Houston sky was doing something genuinely beautiful the last 20 minutes, of light turning everything the color of something not quite named. I watched it from the window with the pan in my hands, and I let it be what it was. You get to a certain age and you understand that the point of things is rarely what you thought it was when you started. You build bridges so water can move. You raise children so they can leave. You love someone for 31 years, and then you learn to carry the weight of the absence, and you find, eventually, to your own surprise, that you are still capable of being useful to someone. That is not a small thing. I had been reminded of that on a concrete bench outside a facility I never moved into, by a man in a charcoal suit who had lived long enough to know what mattered. I didn't need to be thanked for any of it. I didn't need Derek to understand it immediately, or Renee to feel bad, or anyone to acknowledge that things might have gone differently if they'd been paying a different kind of attention. I just needed to keep doing the work. Season the pan, make the coffee, show up on Tuesday, hold what was worth holding. And if you find someone sitting alone on a bench who needs a hand getting to the elevator, give it to them. You never know what either of you might get out of the arrangement.